Joanne Thomka, and she's the director of the National Traffic Law Center of the National District Attorneys Association, who I also might add is coming back to where she went to law school, as I remember.
Sorry.
Yeah, so not a stranger to Vermont at all. We welcome her back to Vermont, and Joanne, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everybody. I was very happy to hear the Colonel speaking this morning because we're in the same gene pool. We sound the same. We root for the same teams, I think. Unlike Ted Manal and those pinstripes, which just kill me. I'm very happy to be here in Vermont. As the Commissioner said, I went to Vermont Law School, so I was a resident here for about 3 years, 84 to 87. And then I moved to upstate New York, so I kept getting colder and colder and colder. In my world, I went to live where the clouds go to die in Syracuse. And that's where I was a prosecutor for just shy of 16 years. And for the last 6 years that I worked in the district attorney's office, I worked for a man by the name of Bill Fitzpatrick. And I was the head of what we called our DWI unit. And I credit Mr. Fitzpatrick with a lot of ingenuity and a lot of faith and a lot of belief in the importance of traffic safety and in getting these killers off the road. We had everything alcohol related and every kind of vehicular crime in our unit other than theft. So I dealt with everything from possessing a forged or fictitious driver's license to purchase alcohol to those crashes on the highway. And I want to commend each and every one of our speakers that you've heard from today, because for those of you who know me, specifically at this table and that table over there, I have a couple of missions in life, and I have a couple of soapbox moments that I'll make during my presentation. And one of them is that no one ever, ever, ever again uses the word accident when it comes to any kind of an impaired or a distracted driving case. Because although no one ever intends to wipe out a family of 5 or to kill a grandmother on Christmas Eve, they did intend to consume. They did intend to consume to the point of impairment. They did intend to take their eyes off the road and type out a 108-character text message. Yeah, they intended to do that. And that's not an accident. That is anything but an accident. And I encourage you all to use your own word. Now, I heard Mike and Jake earlier today. They all used the word crash. The connotation of the word crash, the visual impact that that word has in your head, think about that in comparison to, oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am, about the accident that killed your son. Okay? If we don't start sending that message right now, how do we expect those 12 wacky people in the box that we put in to judge our cases, how do we expect them to appreciate the severity of these horrific events? So find your word, find your comfort zone when you talk about these devastations, because that's what it is. Those people's lives will never, ever, forever be the same after that event. So find your word, but don't minimize the horror that they have been through. And I don't mean they just have to die. How many of you know people who were 18 years in the prime of their lives and now they'll forever be a 3-year-old because of the closed brain injury? Or now they'll never have their arms, or they'll never have use of their legs. Okay, that was soapbox moment number 1. But obviously it means a great deal to me. Okay? Because I used to be the prosecutor, like I know Greg has been, to go out to those crash scenes and to see what our law enforcement officers in this room saw. And I think it made me a better prosecutor because I saw that horror you saw. And I saw you before your sergeant came over and said, you got to go to the door. I saw the look on your face. And I saw when you just finished holding that girl's hand as she died in the car. Or you knew they were taking that girl to the hospital no longer with her arms attached to her body. And that made me better able to communicate in the courtroom with you because I saw what you saw. I could help you bring back that memory, and that smell, and that sound, and that feel. Okay? And that's what we all should be doing. We should all be working together to send that message across. So I'm going to ask you to remember the word teamwork, because we sure don't do this alone. I know you don't do this alone. What's your first name?
Ron.
Ron. My new best friend, Ron, because he was in the front row. You already got the hand pat. It's going to be a long afternoon for Ron. Okay? But we have to think of this fight, and that's what it is. It's a fight. Okay? We have to think about this fight as a unified front. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what's happening here. And always, people, if you use somebody else's materials, please give credit. You know, copyright notice. All right? But we have to remember why we work so hard. And I say prosecute because I'm a prosecutor. But enforce, as you guys do, and our treatment providers and our lab folks, okay, why we all work so hard to fight this fight. And I remember this every single day of my life. This is why I do it. Okay? Into this car, I'll give you just a brief thing, because I'll refer to it over the next little bit. Driving this car was a woman by the name of Liza Turner. In the passenger seat, and this used to be a car, in the passenger seat was her husband, Brian Turner, and in the back seat here was her mother, Rose Williams. Brian was the sole outside income for the family, and they had 4 children, 3 of them developmentally disabled kids. Rose, Liza's mom, she helped every day take care of those children. And you know what? They made it work. These were happy, healthy kids. They went to their own school system. Their daughter was a straight A student in high school. Okay? Liza had just gone to pick up Brian on this actually relatively nice day in Syracuse back in April of '03. And as they were coming down the road, on a road they drove on almost every day of their lives, coming around the corner from the other direction was a guy named Stephen Vulcan. Now please notice, this is my other soapbox moment. These aren't numbers. These aren't just the deceased. These aren't statistics. These are people. These are Liza and Brian and Rose. We have to give them the dignity and the respect that they deserve when we talk about these types of cases. Okay? They were coming home. A kid by the name of Stephen Vulcan was coming the other way, coming from drinking all afternoon. He was a beer distributor, of all things. How ironic. But he had been drinking with his buddy, he'd been drinking with his dad, and they were coming around a curve. Stephen Vulcan and his friend were coming around a curve, Liza and Brian and Rose coming straight ahead. Well, there was a car in front of Liza as they approached the curve. That car saw Vulcan coming across a double yellow, not maneuvering the curve. That lady and her son in the first vehicle were able to get out of the way. There was nowhere for Liza to go, and Stephen Vulcan hit her head on. Rose was killed instantaneously in the back seat, severed aorta. Brian, as you can tell from the crush damage, he was the worst injured. He had to be airlifted. And for 45 minutes, Liza sat in that driver's seat, just broken. Everything was broken. And they couldn't get her out. They had to get him out first, then they tried to get her out. They airlifted him, they ambulanced her, they brought her to the same ER, to the same ER bay, because they knew her husband was there, and he died 5 minutes after she got there. I am happy as hell to say every single day that I still get text messages and I get calls from Liza Turner, giving me updates on the kids, giving me updates. She has a new boyfriend finally. She's so excited. And she can walk. How that woman, if you ever saw her legs and her feet after this crash, how she ever could put weight on those again, let alone walk, it is a miracle. When they did the investigation into this case, alcohol and marijuana in his system, he was a .14 in the middle of the day. And that's what's on our roads, and that's the fight we fight. And I fight for the memory of Brian and Rose and all the other victims that I dealt with when I was in the DA's office. And I think I fight for the people that you guys talk about. Because I know as soon as I went to Ron and I did that to him, all of you who have ever had to make the knock, like Mike Brown said and like Mike Gerasi said, you all had a Liza Turner in your head, or a Brian Turner, or a Rose Williams. So what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to reference Liza for the next little while and her family, because it's important to remember that. It's important to remember when it does get arduous and someone has the nerve to say to someone like Mike Gerasi, we just don't have the time. Really? You go tell Liza, we don't have the time to train our officers to do these investigations. We don't have the time to train our prosecutors to go into that courtroom. We don't have the time to train our lab people. Okay? I don't want to be that person, because you should deserve to be slapped across the face. We all have to make the time. No one ever said this was a 9-to-5 job. Okay, you guys knew it when you slapped on your guns and your badges. I knew it when I took my oath as a prosecutor. It's not a 9-to-5 job. We have to find a way to make it work. We're all stretched really thin, but you know what? They deserve that. That's why we do this job. Okay? I think that was 3 soapboxes already. I'm like on my second slide. See how we do. All right, so here's our objective. Here's what we're going to talk about in the next 45 minutes or so. And I firmly believe this should be a discussion. If anybody how are you? Good. We just sat on a committee together. If anybody has a comment, a question, please. This is the best resource tool ever, is the content of this room. And we should be sharing information. We should be talking to each other and not at each other. Okay? So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to raise the awareness of drug driving issues in this state, and I want you to understand how it pertains to some of the things that are happening across the country. All right, we're also going to discuss the training and educational opportunities to combat drug driving. And the lieutenant and Jim talked a lot about the DRE program. I'm just going to touch on another couple of aspects of that as we go along. But you also need to know what training's out there for us as prosecutors and what resources are out there that are free for all of you to have a better understanding of what this problem is. We all know in our own little cocoon, but I learn things every time I come here. Every time I come to a seminar about what some of the issues are and how we can better address them. Right? And then we're going to talk about how we can better effectively investigate and prosecute. Okay? Because I'm going to tell you something. We talked about blood and we talked about testing. Test results are a bonus. They are a bonus. And for the prosecutors in the room, you know what I mean. For the toxicologists in this room, you know what I mean. Something could always happen to the sample. They could challenge how the sample was actually taken. There could have been an issue in the lab. The analyst isn't available, blah, blah, blah. So I expect my officers and I expect myself to be trained well enough to prosecute these cases without that result. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. Okay? So what's the problem? We've all talked about drug driving, but really where are the underlying issues? So let's look at it. This is just illicit drug use, okay, that we're going to talk about right now. Okay? This is 2011 data, and I've put down the citations for you, and I think Ted said that our PowerPoints are going to be available. Please feel free. I have no ownership interest, but if you take a slide out, always make sure you put a copyright in there because it's not your materials, and these are for educational purposes, okay? But they put the site down where you can go and look at some of this data. It is amazing. It is educational every time you open these websites. Okay? 22.5 million Americans aged 12 or older were current. That means in the past month, illicit drug users. 12. They had to go back to the age of 12. How many of you saw on the news today the 3 8-year-olds, or 2 8-year-olds and a 9-year-old, got arrested in a grammar school in Ohio for smoking pot? Okay? Today, 8 years old. That's why our data collection has gone back to the age of 12. Okay? That's frightening enough for me to say we have to work together to figure this out. Okay? So if you look at that, and that's what they're talking about. They're talking about marijuana and hashish, like the doctor was saying earlier, cocaine and heroin and hallucinogens. All of the illicit drugs. The problem is out there. Okay, we're all talking now, everybody's talking about prescription and just heroin. We can't forget that all these other drugs are out there and on the street. They're out there and in the schools, and they're starting at age 12. Okay? This is the current rate of illicit drug use across the country, ages 12 to 17. 10.1% of the population of the United States have utilized in the past month, according to the survey by SAMHSA. That's horrifying. Okay? Look at all those things that these kids can't do legally. They can't drive cars. And yet they're smoking hash, or they're snorting heroin. Okay? All right? And this is about drugs driving. And again, 2011 statistics, 9.4 million persons, or 3.7% of the population, again, age 12 or over, reported driving under the influence during the past year. And that's a self-report. That's not even you guys stopping them getting it. These are people that will out loud say, yes, I have done that. Okay? And that's under illicit drugs. That isn't just them taking their Ambien or them taking their, whatever the heck else the Kennedy gal took. Did you want to spit when that came out? I was out of my head, and I was in a room full of prosecutors when the verdict came in from New York. We were up in Saratoga. That's another discussion for another day. Okay? And for ages 18 to 25, it's 11.6%. But this is what I actually want you to really, really think about too, because we all know there's an illicit drug problem in the United States. Maybe we didn't know it started so young. But let's talk about prescription-related impaired driving, because this is where we're just getting crushed. Okay, I know Vermont has a huge heroin problem right now. Not to minimize it at all, but this is unbelievable when you start looking at these statistics. The US, on average, 12.1 prescriptions per person. Now this is from the Kaiser group, and here's their website again down here. You should see all the stuff that's available on that about prescription drug use. But this is on average across, this is filled at pharmacies, reported via the pharmacy system, on average across the nation, 12.1 prescriptions per person. Now that doesn't mean they're all impairing substances. People take diabetes medicine. People take cholesterol medicine. They take heart medicine. But this also includes they take antidepressants. Kids are taking Ritalin, all these other kinds of drugs, but 12.1 per person on average. Well, let's see how you guys do. All right? In Alaska, who would have thunk it? I would have thought they might have been the highest. I mean, what else are they going to do, right? 7.5 per person. Well, here you are in cold country, 17.4 per person in the state of Vermont. Filled prescriptions per capita of your 626,000 people in the state. Little scary. A lot scary. Because where are all those ending up? They're ended up in pill parties, like Jake said. All right, where are they ending up? But let's take a look at what's around you, because you cannot look at state statistics in a vacuum. I know that Vermont is a very independent-minded state. I did live here for 3 years. And I lived in South Royalton, down where the law school is. But you can't look at the drug driving problem. You can't look at any kind of impaired driving problem in a vacuum. You have to see what is influencing your surroundings. And I think Mike Gerasi was saying that about know your community. Your community can extend beyond your borders, because you have to know what's coming. So in New York, per capita, 13 per person. In Massachusetts, 10.9. In New Hampshire, 13.5. And again, we go back to you, 17 point something. So right around you, all the states that easily traverse into your community also have access to these drugs. So you need to keep that in mind, all right? This goes back to the other stats. For 0 to 18, the retail per capita, this is in Vermont, 5.7 for people 0 to 18. Now, I know most of us in this room are old enough to remember, if you fell down and you hurt your ankle or whatever, your father says, okay, Joe, back up now. You cried for 10 minutes. let's go. Okay, back outside. All right, am I right? They didn't take you to the doctor every time you sneezed 4 times to get another prescription. We are a society that is of instant gratification. Whether it's, I want the crime to be solved on TV in 45 minutes. I want to feel better by taking a pill. I want to lose weight by taking a pill. I want to do this by having it done for me in 7.4 minutes, which is about our attention span. Okay? So think about these kids that are 0 to 18, 5.7 prescriptions. What the heck are they on? All right? And then we look at age 19 to 64, which is the majority of our driving population. Okay, so keep that in mind. And they have 17.5 prescriptions. How many of them are impairing? All right? And then age 65 and over in Vermont, look at what happened to Mrs. Brown. Look at what happened to Mike's mom. How many of us in this room, my father's 87 years old and just had major surgery. You should have seen the litany of crap they were giving him right after surgery. And we're like, my father does not need OxyContin. All right, you can treat him somehow better. I don't want him to be dependent. I want him to regain his independence as best he can. Okay, what are we doing? What are we accepting in our society? And we have to realize, and it all goes back to education, it all goes back to knowing our community. What message are we sending? Are we educating these people about the dangers of that? No one spoke to Mrs. Brown about the interactions of those medications. Imagine if she got behind the wheel on some of those in that 3,000-pound missile.
What about the education to the medical community for prescribing?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yep. I know that AAA, and I'm sorry that Jake is not here, AAA has started doing some work with the medical community because I am on your bandwagon. Do you need to stand on the chair? I'll stand right next to you, brother.
Okay.
I will.
Okay.
Because that's exactly right. Because and we need to bring them to this table. It's great that we talk to each other in this field, in law enforcement, in prosecution, in healthcare, but what are we doing without them? To say this is why you're not messaging correctly, why you have an obligation, doctor, to make that known about the interaction. Because unfortunately, as we all know, it's not just the 64-year-olds or 65-year-olds that are taking those pills. Somehow those are trickling down to other members of the family because they're in the medicine cabinet. Why aren't we teaching the Mrs. Browns and the Frank Nagels to say, hey, you should be putting your medicine away. You should be putting it under lock and key. If you have a home health aide coming in, you know, if your grandkids live across the street and they're in and out of the house all day. We all want to love and respect our children, but bad things do happen. But who's explaining that to my dad?
Pharmacies.
Target the pharmacies. Yep. Why aren't they stepping up? Aren't they supposed to? Okay. All right. And this is the other thing with those older drivers, these drug-impaired drivers and officers, I ask you all, aren't you seeing more and more elderly impaired drivers? Okay? We see them all the time down in Virginia. All right? And our aging population, we're going to have 92 million people by 2030, and dear God, I think I'm going to be in that category. I know I'm going to be in that category. Okay? By that time. And who knows what medications we'll be on? And who knows? Right? So that's part of the problem. And then this is just the big map, and I didn't want you guys to feel like Vermont was the sole person. But isn't this an interesting group? Look at that. And they're all high. They're all the higher end. And God knows what's going on in Iowa out there all by itself. Okay? But that's what you have to be aware of in terms of what's coming in and out of Vermont. You're a huge tourism state, and it isn't just in the winter. And these people are driving on your roads with these illicit drugs, with all these prescription drugs, and people are pretty quick to pull out their bottle and say, doctor told me. Okay? Well, dosing from a doctor does not necessarily mean, and somebody else had the slide up there, safe. I think it was the doctor. Okay? Prescription amount doesn't necessarily mean safe operation. Like if you take Ambien, the point of taking Ambien is to go to sleep. It doesn't mean you get in the car and drive. That's not why you take Ambien. And yet people think, oh, I'll just take it now. I'm going to take my kid to school. I'm going to stop by the store. And oh, wait, I'm going to go by the pharmacy and pick up one of my 17 prescriptions. And then I'll make it home safe and sound. Well, no, you won't. Okay? And you'll crash into a truck. You'll crash into something. And there'll be another Brian Turner. Okay. I just wanted to show you, I want to follow up what the lieutenant said earlier when he was showing you some of the data from your state. This is from the National Sobriety Testing Resource Center, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. All of this data is a result of the DRE evaluations, and we had all our DREs stand up. And again, I would like to just give our DREs just another quick round of applause, because honest to God, they're out there doing this. Okay? But look at your data, and again, just to confirm what the lieutenant said. This is results from your DRE evaluations from January of 11 to January of 14. And look at where your two big problems are. And this is why you should know this. This is why this communication need is out there. Okay? Look at your cannabis, which I'm telling you right now is going to skyrocket, your narcotics, and your depressants. Okay? And those are coming. And look at the matches. Look at how well your DREs have done with regard to confirmatory matches from their calls to what the results were. Okay? Those are huge statistics. And officers, am I correct? Are you anticipating in 2014, 2015, the biggest rise will be depressants and cannabis? Is that what you think, Lieutenant? Based on what you've heard? Okay? And what you're seeing? And probably in the lab, probably more and more testing is going out for that. This is New York, just again, so you know, a lot of the drug trends across the country come from west to east. I think most of us are aware of that. So your biggest border is New York, all right? And they're coming over. And the people from Massachusetts, medical marijuana. Governor Cuomo's now looking at medical marijuana in New York. Can you imagine that? Okay? But that's what's coming up. And look at what we have in New York. Now, certainly the population is different, but you can get the idea. Same three: depressants, narcotics, and cannabis. And it's all coming your way. So you had all your own, now you're having some more coming in. So you have to be aware of it. The officers have to be trained and they have to be vigilant to know that those substances are being abused in their state and their surrounding states. And one good thing for those of you not in law enforcement to know is that the law enforcement officers have access to this data. So they can go in and check, hey, how have things changed in the last 6 months? How have they changed in the last year? Because this data allows them to go and look by agency. It allows them to look, I think, by county, if I'm not correct, Mike, by county. So if there's a huge influx in Windsor County, which is, I think, where South Royalton was, am I right? Yeah? Okay. Down there, well, then what the heck's going on up in Burlington? Are we seeing a correlation? Are we seeing a rise? And this is a tool that law enforcement has to utilize in this fight. Okay? So again, that's just a comparison between the two, so you can see how very similar the drug driving issue is in your two states. Okay? And then polydrug use, the lieutenant talked about that. And in your total opinions, 33.79% you're looking at in terms of polydrug use in Vermont. That's staggering. Right? That's more than one. That's more than one. Okay. We talked a bit about marijuana, just another list of what's happening out there and who's now involved. And another soapbox moment for me, I hate the term medical marijuana because no doctor can legally write a prescription for marijuana. They can make a referral, but it is not medicine. I've heard the term therapeutic used. Doctor, have you heard other ones besides therapeutic marijuana?
My patients just call it marijuana.
Right, okay? But again, if we don't stop using that term, all right, there's a conception, and we're going to talk about our jurors, because our jurors are the people that take those 17 prescriptions and they think it's medicine. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so what are the overall problems? Now we've talked about the illicit drug use, we've talked about prescriptions, we've talked about those kinds of things, and I think Jake and I think Greg very well talked about that a lot of these guys escape detection. We have no national standard. And we have had this ingrained in our temples since we were kids, between a 0.10 and a 0.08, depending on the change and how old we are. But we've always been hearing about this stuff. Okay? In our health classes in high school, we hear about it. Now they're teaching kids in grammar school, all right, about alcohol. But we're not reaching out. When there's no national standard that we can teach these people about, start it with the kids so that they have a correlation to how bad a drug is, to operation. Alcohol is always the call. We would love to see law enforcement get away from that. And I mean no disrespect, but a lot of people see it as the easy way out. You see the alcohol, you know you have more than an 08, you make the call, case done. And those of us that deal with a lot of statistics over here at the front, we were just crushed. We still are crushed because of all the data and all the information that we're missing to see what else is out there in these drivers. Now, I know it's important to get the operator off the road. I do understand that. We all understand that for safety reasons, for everything. But it's still very disconcerting if there's more out there that we can just make that concerted effort to try to get. Okay? And even we're going to talk about why these are so difficult to prove once we get our evidence from the law enforcement officers. And there's just such lack of awareness, there's lack of education, training, and what we would consider proper reaction to this information. Okay? And that pertains to the entire criminal justice system, from the judiciary to us as prosecutors, to our probation officers being well informed, everybody else in the system. Okay? We're not getting the message out. We're not getting the right education into the hands of the people who need it. And we're also not getting it to the public. And we as members of the community, and again, know your community, what should we be doing more? Okay? Do we go to the schools and talk? Do we go to the driver ed programs? We're the ones who can impart the message. Are we doing it? Okay? I'm going to tell you from dealing with wacky jurors for way too many years, no, we're not. We're not getting the message out. We're going to talk about that. Okay? Lack of trained law enforcement, lack of trained prosecutors, and lack of trained judges. Let's talk about that for a minute. Okay? Lab limitations, I think we talked a bit about that. I was asking Greg Nagurney, it's devastating to me to know that your misdemeanor drug, DWI drug cases, all your blood goes someplace else. You don't have the resources in your state to test your own blood. And I said, how often do you have a problem from the defense attorney saying, I'll be right here when you spend that 10 grand to prosecute that misdemeanor. I'm waiting, Greg. Ready? Go ahead, spend the money. I'm surprised more of them don't do it. But I could have kissed Greg right on the cheek when he said, I don't need a test, because we're going to prosecute it anyway. All right? That's the right answer. So, law enforcement, we talked about the DEC program. I think we're all thrilled for the fact that West Virginia, who was the holdout in the DEC program, finally came on board. And I'm going to pass out for you guys in a couple minutes. No, we're not going to do it now, Sue. Just for those of you who have never actually seen it, the DEC face sheet. And I'm going to show it to you in a minute. Okay? The DRE. This is what you have. And I just checked with you guys, and you're up around, what did you say, Lieutenant? 35, okay, from 27. And that's pretty darn good for the size of your population. And you're growing, and you're going to do another class. I mean, that's fantastic, all right, to get those resources out there. This is statewide, just so you know what the DRE looks like around the country. And this was as of December of 12. There's a new map coming out, I think, in March or May, a new map coming out with the new numbers. But this will just give you an idea of how many DREs are out there that are fighting the same fight, that are trying to stop. I mean, there's 178 of them. I'm curious to know how many are in the Albany area. Mike, any idea?
What is the percentage of that?
Right. which hopefully is stopping a lot of the traffic that's coming over your borders. But that's good to know, okay, that they're increasing their population of them all the time. Massachusetts just increased. Okay? This is what I was talking about. This is called the DRE face sheet. Now, I know all my law enforcement officers are familiar with these, and I'm going to ask Sue, not right now, Sue. Poor Sue, she's on the edge of her chair, ready to pass them out for me. I'm going to pass these out. I only made about 100 copies, so law enforcement, you might be able to skip a couple tables, too. But this will give you an idea. The lieutenant talked about the 12-step program and how in-depth this training is for these law enforcement officers. This is the DRE sheet where they go through every 12-step and they maximize the information that they can glean. This is not all. This is just making sure they utilize the 12 steps. Then they write narratives. Then they write other reports that include everything they're gleaning from this defendant. Like, oh, by the way, he didn't have any pants on. Okay? Or he thought he could fly. That's why he kept moving his arms like this. Beautiful. I want to know that. Because I can read this report all I want, but when I put you on the stand and I say, Detective, can you tell me when you were talking to him, was he making any body movements? Well, yes, he was, as a matter of fact. He was flapping his arms like a bird. And you can see those 12 jurors all of a sudden turn and look at the defendant. You were flapping your arms like a bird? Did he say anything to you, detective? Yes, he did. He said he thought he could fly, and he was just going to fly right out the window. Lovely. Imagine the impact that has on my juror. So they're going to fill out this face sheet, the 12 steps, and they're going to give me a whole nother sheet with comments, with actions, attire, everything. So that I'm now having those 12 wacky people in the box, they're now looking at Tom like, you know what? You don't look like the guy that works in the bank anymore. You don't look like my son's soccer coach anymore. Now you look like some whacked out guy on drugs driving on my street. And you can literally see their faces go. Okay? As we used to say, it was the Frank Nagel look, that, you know, squish your forehead a little bit, stare at you. All right? But that's what we do. And we're going to pass this out so you guys can see the quantity of information these DREs are looking for. And I think it was Jim who said something about 100 pieces of evidence or 100 things that they're looking for. I wouldn't be surprised if they can rattle off 150 by the time their examination is over. And I'm sorry you don't have the time. Oh, I wish I knew who said that to you. Okay, good. We're going to have a chat. All right? But that guy's not going anywhere because Greg's going to convict him or Tom's going to convict him because we have all of this information to show that that person was impaired. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the Sobriety Testing Resource Center. All the DREs are aware of it, but other officers in the room, if you're not aware of it, touch base with Ted as your DRE coordinator to find out what you can do to gain access to this information. Because this kind of stuff should be used in roll call. This kind of stuff should be in your weekly planning meetings with your chiefs to know that this is the stuff that's coming out. This is fascinating data. And I think it's so underutilized. I think everybody should be using it. I mean, I asked for special permission in my position to be able to do this so I could encourage the law enforcement officers to utilize it. It's not readily accessible to everybody. But if you go through your DRE coordinator, if you're conscious of the problem and you want to have some information, he can share information, just not access. Law enforcement, you're another story. Okay? There are over 320,000 evals in that system right now. It's probably more than that. It's probably closer to 340. But that information can be utilized so you start to see the trends of the driving problem coming across to Vermont. All right? A-RIDE we talked about. One of the other things that hadn't been mentioned yet that I wanted to mention for any other prosecutors in the room, of course, Greg went to the school, to the DRE school, which was pretty cool. But the A-RIDE program, there is now an online version, as I think both Mikes mentioned, I think the lieutenant mentioned. But prosecutors also have the ability to take the online course. We can sign in as prosecutors. We don't have to go through the SFST certification process like the law enforcement officers do to take A-RIDE. But I can sit at my desk and take the A-RIDE course. And I did it. And it is awesome. I would, for any of you in a prosecutor's office or sit down weekly or monthly with your prosecutors, please encourage them to take it. It's got a great amount of information, and it makes me, again, better able to communicate with Ron. Because now I'm speaking your language. Now I'm understanding more about the training process that you went through. So when I'm asking you a question, and maybe you skip 2 steps ahead of me, I can bring you right back. All right? I would encourage everyone to do that. And these are all free. These resources are free from NHTSA, through the funding through NHTSA. We should be utilizing this. If not, shame on us. The info is out there. Okay? DITEP is another program. IACP, the International Association Chiefs of Police. We do throw a lot of little, what do they call those, acronyms around a lot. Just want to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. IACP is the International Association Chiefs of Police. They're the certifying, they keep all the certification records for the DREs. They all go through your state DRE coordinator. You're certified in the state. But DITEP is a program for education professionals. And it's a 2-day program, and you can go on the IACP website and plug in DITEP for those of you in the education field or want to share information with other professionals in your group. And it's a program, they come in and they basically talk about the 7 drug categories, the signs and symptoms, and it's geared for the upper management of the school to get an understanding of what potentially could be the problem in their environment. But it also goes to the school resource officers, the school nurses that have that one-on-one with the student. When he comes in, 4 days late from school and he's nodding off, poor Tom. See, I stopped picking on you, Ron. I went right over to Tom. All right, now Tom's my defendant. Now he's like my whacked out high school kid. All right, and all of a sudden now we know, hey, he's probably been drinking cough syrup by the gallon. All right, or he just went out and he must have been smoking something because now he can't even talk. So the school nurses, the resource officers get that education about the signs and symptoms of the various drug categories so they can start making those assessments. Does he need medical care? Do we need to call in law enforcement because there may be a problem here in the school? I think it's a terrific program. Okay? Law enforcement liaisons. Ted, how many in the state, in Vermont?
Let's see, there's 2.
Your law enforcement liaisons, for law enforcement officers, and for those of you that don't know what they are specifically hired to help get the training and coordination across the state for law enforcement. They do a lot of the NHTSA campaigns, they do the click it or ticket, they do the speed management things, but they can also be utilized if you see a need in your jurisdiction to help bring that training where it's needed. And that's the benefit of the law enforcement liaison program. Okay, so don't forget to utilize that. Again, Ted wears many hats, and I can't say any more good about him because his head won't fit through the door. And he's, again, a damn Yankee fan. But utilize the great resource that you have in Ted. He's lived up here for 20 years. He knows Vermont like the back of his hand. But he doesn't know the need if you don't tell him. If you don't open those lines of communication and say, hey, in Essex County we're having this problem, what are we going to do? We can't fight this fight by ourselves. How come we don't have our prosecutors involved? How come we've never had prosecuting the drugged driver here in our community? That course. Why haven't we had that? Ted, we need that. Okay? He can help facilitate that. So can Greg. Okay? All right, we've talked about oral swabs. Mike talked about that. This is some of the technology that's coming down the pike. And I'm the least techno person in the world. I mean, I got my iPhone like a year and a half ago, and I'm still go to my stepson to show me how to do things on the phone. I had to buy beer for someone because I couldn't figure out how to close the apps on my phone. I did. I had to put my head in my hand because all I could think of was that, was it Freud who said, it's the idiot who thinks if you do the same things repeatedly, you'll get a different answer? I spent a half an hour doing the same thing with my iPhone thinking I could finally fix it, and I couldn't. But we shouldn't be afraid of technology. It's coming, and we need to utilize it. I mean, think about the total workstation. When those things first came out, people were terrified for collision reconstruction. They are now the gold standard for collision reconstruction. How did this crash happen? How did you end up 200 feet from your car and she's hanging out the way back window? Who the heck was driving? All right, technology now can tell us that. So when these oral swabs, and I'm not promoting Draeger as the maker, they just have a lot of information on their website if you're interested to learn more about the oral swab testing. Just go to the Draeger website, go to some of the other instrument makers and see what's happening and how quickly it's being developed. This California study is going to be amazing. Everybody's sitting and waiting. We'll probably see it like the end of 15 maybe, hoping for the end of 15, which is a whole lot quicker than we think it is. But to have that kind of data, the use of new technology, and then we're ready to bring it to the courtroom. Okay? Uniform specimen, we talked about that. Law enforcement officers, this is the one thing, and for those of you not in law enforcement, what we all harp on our cops about all the time, and I say our cops, all right, is document, document, document. Because everything you can tell me, the flapping of the wings, I think I can fly, I don't have my pants on, I don't, you know, whatever. All of those documents are now going to set Tom apart from my jury. Because now all of you are thinking, I would never do that. All right? And I want you to know that. And I don't know it unless he documents it. So there's no timetable on how fast you have to do it. Again, I remind us all, and it's hard. You guys have the hardest jobs in the world, but it's not about speed. It's about accuracy. It's about the right information to get that person off the road. So I ask you to document and focus on descriptive stuff. Describe for me the flapping of the arms, okay? Like a big bird, like up and down with the arms. Not like, okay? I want to know the description. Tell me. And here's the thing I'm going to ask you, okay? We often get cross-examined, officers do, by, how am I doing? Oh, look at that, John, okay? One of the things that people often get cross-examined on, especially with the DEC program, and officers tell me if I'm wrong, well, officer, you just made a guess, didn't you? You just made a guess. When you did these little 12 things and you took my client's blood pressure, you looked in his eye with a flashlight? That's what you did? And you just made a guess at the end, didn't you? And for those officers that are not comfortable on the stand, that are new, they're not quite sure how to answer that question. Well, of course you didn't take a guess. You are a trained professional. You've been through the academy. You have hands-on experience. You're now a certified DRE. You had to do all these evaluations to be certified. You've kept up your log. You've been recertified twice. No, sir, I didn't take a guess. I made a logical conclusion based on my education, my training, my observations of the defendant right there the night of the incident, not when he's sitting here in his nice Brooks Brothers suit, okay? When he was crying like a little girl and throwing up, okay? I made a logical conclusion based on my education, my training, my observations, and my experience. We're not apologizing for the work we do. We are standing with confidence behind the work we do. You don't have to use my phrase. That's just a phrase I came up with. But you never take a guess. Okay? And don't ever let a defense attorney back you into a corner and demand an answer like that. You sit up a little straighter. No, sir, I didn't make a guess. Would you like to know what I did? Okay? Take the wind right out of his sails. You are the experts. Greg even gave you this section of the law here in Vermont that says we need to put an expert on the stand to talk about this information. That expert is all of you. I'm putting you up there as the state's expert. Experts don't guess. Okay? And we talked about the fact that tests may be thrown out. You never go into a case resting on your laurels that you were able to get blood. Okay? You better be able to describe to that jury, based on your observations, your training, and your experience, that Tom was under the influence of a dissociative anesthetic. Okay? If you see stuff like this, if you see stuff like that, describe it for me, because I might not get that picture into evidence. For some reason or another, judge may think it's too prejudicial because there's brain matter there. Okay, it's out. How are you going to describe that for me? To put the picture in the jurors' heads, these 6 guys right here are my jurors, how are you going to do that? Because that's the first thing I want them to hear about in this drugs driving crash, is the horror of it. And you guys better be able to do that without a picture. Okay? Same thing with substances. A lot of jurors have never seen this stuff up close. Now, you'd have to check with your prosecutors. Can you bring the drugs into court, Tom? Can you bring the bags in? Anybody? Prosecutors? Probably. Okay, you'd probably have an officer bring it over. Probably never be out of the sight of the officer that's transporting. But they don't ever see this. Okay, they don't really know, like, what does hashish look like? You know, it can look like tobacco. It can look like a big wad. It can look like a whole bunch of things. It can be oil in a container. All right, what does it look like? Let them see it. All right, these are tools. These are training tools that we now need to start using. And officers, I want you to tell us in descriptive manner, where did you find this on the defendant? Or where did you find it within arm's reach on the seat? The same with the crack pipe, okay, or the marijuana pipe. Where was it? Bring in the pipe. Okay? All right? It's all, again, everybody, about totality of the circumstances. It's about teamwork. It's about putting every single piece of this puzzle together. Okay? I need you officers to bring me the information. I need thorough, well-documented reports. I need to be able to communicate with you about that information. I need you to tell me. I don't want to sit here and pull teeth. And here's another soapbox moment. Okay? You have a lot that you can expect from me. I am a professional. I took an oath to do my job. You can expect me to be educated. You can expect me to be prepared. I expect the same from you. If I subpoena you for a hearing, don't come over and make me watch you read. I expect you to be ready to go. And you can expect that from me. Okay? Got to have confidence in the courtroom. These are some of, quickly, our challenges that we have as prosecutors, and I've already talked about that. The sympathy of the jurors. Because they see medicine. They see that Ms. Kennedy took her medicine. It was an accident. Did you hear that she's been taking that for 10 years? And she didn't know the difference? Okay, anyway, I digress. But these guys, all they've ever heard about is medicine. I take medicine. My wife takes medicine. My mom takes medicine. Everybody takes medicine. They didn't mean to. The doctor said so. Take your medicine. All right? These are the jurors that we have. And we have to educate them beyond that. Okay? I don't want to beat a dead horse on that, but it's really very true. All right? And it's our burden. You guys have to understand that a lot of the burden comes on us as prosecutors. Not all our judges who are courts of many jurisdictions, you know, a judge could be a probate judge, he could be a county court judge, he could also be, I don't know, you could be hearing divorces in the afternoon, okay? We can't always expect that our judges has the time to go through the training like we do, so we better be prepared together to present this evidence. We have to educate the judge as well as our jury, all right? We also have to know, when we get into sentencing, and again, this is for another time, to talk about our sentencing options. And I know you guys are going to talk about treatment courts, which I think we'll get into this afternoon. Okay? We also know that the effects are much better known about alcohol. We've covered this a little bit. But this is what we have to do. Okay? This is what we as prosecutors, and maybe you guys don't realize this about the work that we have to put into these cases, but we have to learn about these drugs. We have to learn, what are they? What are the pharmacological effects? What are the physiological effects? What are all the other effects that could be happening here? So that I can converse with Ron about what he saw when he watched Tom driving that car. All right, so I have to do a lot of homework. I need to be able to talk to my toxicologist. And how lucky are you guys to have a lab where your people want to participate in this training? They want to be on the same page and be able to converse. That's a huge thing. Okay? I bet they'd even come out and talk to school programs so that families and kids can start understanding the severity of this and what goes into understanding how we figure out what these drugs are. All right? We have to learn these protocols. We have to learn our statutory requirements. And then we have to be responsible for changing the mentality of those 6 guys in, oh, I don't know, about a 2-day trial. Good luck to us. Okay? But we're going to try. We have to try. Because if I start talking to Tor, and he's not saying, he's like, I've never even heard of Ambien before. Oh boy. Okay? I can't spend 3 hours trying to educate him, but I can certainly give a little bit of background, and then I can look at Tim and say, Tim, did you hear what Tor and I were talking about? Does that make sense? Do you think you can follow the law when it comes to that? Do you have any questions? Okay, because you'll ask me while I'm around here, right? All right? And I don't always get exactly this close, but kind of. All right. And we as prosecutors have to ask those hard questions, okay, of our jurors. Educate the judges. We'll skip right over that. All right? You guys have amazing resources to fight this fight in Vermont. You've had the opportunity to meet Greg. Here's all his contact information. This is all the stuff he does for you every day as the Traffic Safety Resource Prosecutor. I am very fortunate to be able to deal with all that we call them TSRPs, the TSRPs from around the country. We communicate, we share information so that if Greg calls me up and says, Joanne, hey, we just had this wacky guy come in from California and he's coming in as an expert. We've never seen him here in Vermont. Do you have any information from him? I say, oh, yes, we do. Would you like some transcripts of his prior testimony? How about the time he was found incredible in Colorado? Would you like that to cross-examine him on? And then Greg's going to call me one day and say, Joanne, this is a brand new guy, used to be a DRE, out on his own, now testifying as a defense attorney. Do you want the transcript? Oh, yes, we do. Because if he's in Vermont, he's going to Massachusetts, he's going to Connecticut. So these are all the things that Greg can do for you. Please utilize that resource. All right? And then, of course, there's Crazy Ted Manal. Okay? Because everybody wants to use that as a prefix for you. Crazy Ted Manal. All right? Awesome, awesome resource for you guys. You know, the law enforcement background, he deals with us, he deals with NHTSA, he deals with the law enforcement liaisons around the country. An amazing resource. And he's over in, that's his information, which I'm sure you all have already. There's also a man by the name of Vern Betke, who's the National Law Enforcement Liaison, a new position. He's housed in the Governor's Highway Safety Association office in Virginia, but he works closely with the LELs from around the country. So if he starts hearing about a problem, say in Kentucky or Ohio or something like that, he may reach out to Ted or the other LELs here and say, hey, be aware, this is coming. Do you want us to help you out? You need some resources. What do you need? So yet another resource to help this state if there are any issues. Okay? And then there's my organization. I work for the National District Attorneys Association. We're a not-for-profit, but we're funded. I'm funded under a grant from NHTSA. And this is what we do. We help to facilitate the field of traffic safety for prosecutors and law enforcement. We do training, we do all this kinds of stuff. And if you go to our website, almost, I would say 99.9% of the materials are free. Download them, share them. Okay, we have monographs, small publications that talk about all these different fields. Alcohol toxicology, drug toxicology, crash reconstruction, the DEC program. Okay, HGN, the science and the law, really understanding what HGN and why it has always been so successful as a detecting cue. All right, all of those are free. If you have new officers coming on, or you have new prosecutors, or even people in the healthcare field or the treatment field that want to understand a little bit more, it's there for free. Okay? One of the things, and Pat Moody is going to talk about this maybe at the end, are about the costs. This is one thing that we tend to get away from, and I'm more going out to our treatment providers and some of our other traffic safety professionals here. We don't often talk to these defendants, or we don't often talk at schools, or we don't often talk, you know, to youth groups or whatever about what is the actual cost, because for a lot of people it's all about the almighty buck. And we have ranged the cost of a first offense, DWI drugs is what we used to call it in New York, anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. It can set you back over the course of a couple of years. All right, and these are all the things that will be hitting your pocketbook. And Pat's group has a publication that they're coming out with that will show you some actual cost breakdown for here in Vermont. But towing and storage, defense attorney, bail, sentencing, fines, and surcharges, court costs can come up near $1,000 in certain jurisdictions. The drug evaluation, treatment programs, probation supervision fee, license reinstatement, insurance. If you have to get a SCRAM device or have an ignition interlock put on your vehicle, there's a monthly fee for that. You also lose time from work, public transportation costs. Like up here, you know, Vermont doesn't have a huge bus thing, and I heard your bus guys are going out on strike. Oh, some grumbling in the room. But you don't have a lot of that. So what happens to people then? They have to bum rides, they have to pay people to drive in places, they have to take cabs, a lot of public transportation costs. And then if they cause damage, the monetary cost to them, and of course any kind of a civil judgment. This is stuff we should be sharing. Okay? This is stuff people don't think about when they go to the Christmas party. It's not what they think about when they go to the pill party with the big bowl. All right? We should be talking about that. Here are some other resources for you. Law enforcement officers, if you want to, you can become a part of what's called our Impaired Driving Forum, and Ted can give you the information to get a hold of me to sign you up. It's a share, it's across the country, traffic safety professionals. A majority are law enforcement officers and prosecutors, and we start talking about these issues, and you get amazing input from people from around the country. And I'm happy to get you people signed up to be on it. It's not active, it's not like you're going to have 75 emails a day, but when there's a hot topic, you may see a lot of traffic about this. You can post and ask a question if something comes up. Hey, how did you guys handle this in your jurisdiction? Okay. NHTSA always, their website is phenomenal. Food and Drug Administration, Physician's Desk Reference. There's an LEL forum now for the law enforcement liaisons. Here's a lot of other resources, reading material. You know, we all do it. We're all the stats people. We read a lot of statistics, and we read a lot of studies that have to do with this field. But that's why we can speak with confidence. And these are out there for you to read. They're not all about, you know, the bell curve and the minus sign and the less than and greater than, because I'm with Greg. That's like crazy. But you start to learn what makes a good study. Was this done with the right group of people? And then you can make sure that that data is effectively utilized. So here are just some that are out there, and these again are in our materials. And these are our goals. Okay? We want to hold people responsible. We want to change behavior. We don't want anybody to die. I don't want any more Brian Turners or Rose Williams. Okay? And I'm going to leave you with Boston Strong. And I do this in all seriousness, as well as the fact that I bleed Boston red. But if you've ever thought of the term teamwork, there is no better utilization of a symbol to dramatize the word teamwork. For those of you who are from Massachusetts and have grown up, you know, with the institution of the political machine in Massachusetts, it's a strange one. But when the marathon bombing happened, you never, ever, and may we never have to again, see a better example of teamwork. Because, you know, we were all glued to the TV, waiting. Did they get him? Did they get him? Did they get him? What's going on? What's going on? And so what did we get? We got unified front messaging. We had Governor Patrick. We had Mayor Menino. We had the U.S. Attorney Ortiz. We had, is it Colonel Albin from the State Police? We had Colonel Albin. We had Commissioner Evans from Boston PD, I think that's his name. We had Dan Connolly and D.A. Ryan from Middlesex and Essex counties. And they all came out together. Now, if you're from Boston, you know that would never, ever happen. We had Homeland Security, we had the FBI, never would you get those people to be on the same stage until we needed the team. We needed the team to fight the fight. And they all came out together and they said, listen to us. We have done our work. We have done our investigation. We know what we're doing. We're working together. And we're going to shut down the city of Boston, and we're going to get them. And people listened. Everybody listened. They said, stay off the road. They stayed off the road. They said, we're going to shut down the T. They shut down the T. No buses were running. Nobody was out because they said, we did our job. Listen to us. Let us go get them. And they did. And they got them. Because all those people worked together. And that's what you guys are doing in this room, working together. I agree, Tom. Bring in the medical people. Bring in the pharmacy people. Bring in whoever else is interested in this fight. That's what they did in Boston. Okay? To fight the fight. So that's what I ask all you guys to do. That's a message I'm sending back. This is a horrible fight. It's a fight we can win. I mean, look at the death rates that we've gone down on in alcohol-related. Look at the messaging we've sent about seatbelts. Okay? We can do it if we do it together and we send that message. Okay? God love the Red Sox. You guys all be safe. I'm going to ask Sue now, if you so will, and some of you may have to share. Just take a look at the deck face sheet while the commissioner's getting ready. Any questions, any comments? You guys are going to be like, send that wacky chick back to Virginia. Anything? Anybody want to add anything that's been successful where you are or what you do?
People ask the advertisers that are advertising their drugs in magazines. It seems as though the more drugs you see, that there's a correlation between that and what we're seeing on the road.
That's a very interesting thing. Maybe the advertisers need to be here.
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure, yes, I'm sorry. He just made, what's your first name? Keith just raised a question. What about all these pharmaceutical advertisements in these magazines? Can we do something about the prevalence of those and who they advertise in, what magazines they advertise in, what billboards they send out, all that kind of information? Maybe they should be here. You know, maybe some of these marketing people, maybe some of these companies should come and say, why do you advertise in that magazine? That magazine is 17. And yet you're talking about Ambien, and you're talking about some of these other things that a child necessarily wouldn't need to have. Anything? All right, guys, thank you.